Leighton froze, disbelief etched across his face, as Gale, a battle-hardened Navy SEAL, stepped forward to defend Jordan. The sneer on Leighton's lips faltered, and his friends exchanged uneasy glances, realizing that the power dynamic they had taken for granted was shifting in an instant. At that moment, none of them understood that this single act of courage would ignite a storm in their lives, a whirlwind of consequences, revelations, and lessons they could never have anticipated. Jordan, trembling but resolute, held on to the brass coin in her pocket, unaware that it symbolized far more than her own survival. It was the key to a chain of events that would change everything. The tension in the air was palpable, a silent warning that the ordinary rules they had lived by no longer apply. Leighton and his friends were about to discover that arrogance and privilege could be dismantled by truth, courage, and unwavering honor. Every glance, every heartbeat carried the weight of the choices ahead. What would happen when the full force of Gale's intervention unfolded? How far would Jordan go to reclaim her dignity and justice? The answers would shock them and anyone watching. But before we proceed, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Now let's understand how this story really began. The pavement cut through the thin layer of cardboard beneath Jordan like a frozen knife. Each breath she drew trembled in her chest, ragged and shallow, vapor curling into the night air. At 30, her body had already aged decades. Her skin bore the ashen hue of someone starved of warmth, of care, of hope. The fingers she curled over her face were split at the knuckles, nails ragged, cuticles inflamed from the repeated friction of cold and grime. A sharp, brutal impact drove the air from her lungs. A designer sneaker pressed against her ribs, and she crumpled further into herself. "Get up, trash!" Leighton's voice cracked with adolescent authority, the kind born from inherited wealth and entitlement. He was 17, yet the venom he spat carried a practiced cruelty, honed in privilege. His varsity jacket gleamed under the street lamp, a uniform signaling a life untouched by struggle. Two others stood behind him, cameras raised, their fingers dancing over touchscreens as they recorded every flinch, every suppressed cry. The lenses captured humiliation with clinical precision. Jordan drew herself tighter, the cardboard beneath her scrunching like paper under a boot. Months of cascading failures, eviction notices, the job loss, the inexorable descent into streets lined with indifference had eroded the last reserves of her physical and mental resistance. She had no fight left in her limbs, no energy to scream, no shield against shame. Yet in her palm, pressed to the hem of her coat, was a single object, small, heavy, consequential, her grandfather's brass coin. The metal was cold, its edges worn smooth by decades of handling, a tangible reminder of legacy and honor she had never known. Her fingers tightened, white-knuckled, a silent act of defiance. "Look at her," Leighton spat, his boot lifting, a predator about to strike. "She doesn't even feel it anymore." The word trash echoed in Jordan's skull as the movement of his leg slowed. But the kick never connected. A shadow eclipsed them, falling over Jordan like a gavel of justice. The boots were tan, rough-out leather, military-grade, not a fashion statement, heavy, deliberate. The man who filled the frame of her vision was a monolith. Gale, 6'4", shoulders broad enough to strain the seams of his fatigued blouse, stood immovable. He did not scan the bows with threat in his eyes. He looked only at her, assessing, registering. The quiet authority he radiated compressed the air, altered the rhythm of heartbeats around him. Desperation seized Jordan, a visceral spike up her spine. She did not seek charity. She did not want pity. She wanted the assurance of safety, the certainty of protection. Her hand shook violently as she retrieved the coin, presenting it like an offering to a deity. Her voice was a rasp, near breaking under the weight of fear and hope. "Please. It's all I have. Just make them stop." Gale's gaze lingered on the coin, then swept to the trio of bows. The pause that followed was monumental, pregnant with authority, the kind that did not need to raise a voice. It pressed down upon the sidewalk, heavier than a scream, heavier than judgment. Gale's approach was methodical, each step measured, boots crushing the icy pavement with authority. But without aggression, he did not raise his voice. In the SEAL teams, a commander's control over personnel, whether in a war zone or in a confined operations center, was projected through posture, presence, and microsignals, everything from the tension in a jaw to the alignment of the shoulders. Leighton, with his adolescent bravado, had never encountered a human being whose authority did not rely on volume or intimidation. He had never faced someone whose very stillness demanded compliance. Gale stopped 2 feet from Leighton, effectively inserting a human barricade between Jordan and the boy. The space he occupied was precise. It compressed Leighton's perception of safety, the invisible boundaries around the bully shrinking under Gale's command presence. Jordan's fingers remained wrapped around the coin, knuckles whitening, arm trembling with residual adrenaline, yet the minute shift of Gale's stance communicated that she was no longer alone, no longer exposed. The scent of leather, cold metal, and something faintly antiseptic emanated from him, unintentional markers of preparedness honed over years of Tier 1 operations. Leighton's confidence faltered. His stance wavered, the slight tick of his left eye betraying the adrenaline spike rushing through his system. "Back off. Man, do you know who my father is?" The words carried entitlement, but the sudden hitch in his tone revealed the misalignment between perceived and actual control. Gale's eyes were unyielding, scanning the boy as if performing a rapid threat assessment. His head tilted subtly, lips compressed, breath even, his voice a low, resonant rumble, carrying the weight of command. "I don't care who your father is. But I know what you are, you're a threat. And I neutralize threats." The sound vibrated through Leighton's chest, an unspoken pressure, a tactile assertion of dominance that required no touch. Leighton's pupils dilated, the corners of his mouth twitched. The slight exhale through clenched teeth was involuntary. His friend's fingers froze over their devices, recording halted mid-frame. The primal calculus of fight or flight activated. Leighton chose flight. He stepped backward, his arrogance leaking through the forced smirk. "Let's go, she smells anyway." The words, meant to humiliate, sounded hollow against the gravity of Gale's presence. The other boys retreated quickly toward a black, glinting SUV idling curbside. Tires crunched over gravel as the vehicle became their shield. Gale's eyes followed the retreat until the threat was gone, the cameras no longer capturing anything of consequence. Only then did he pivot to Jordan, his body relaxing in micro-increments, the rigid tension dissolving like a controlled detonation. Jordan still extended the coin, trembling, as if offering it could buy her continued existence. Gale's hand reached out in a measured motion, never abrupt, closing her fingers over the brass disc with the care of someone handling classified equipment, not mere metal. "Keep your money, ma'am, duty isn't for sale." He scanned her face, noting the shallow cuts, the dry blood on her lip, the way her chest rose and fell unevenly. "Can you stand?" Her voice cracked, almost imperceptible. I think so." Expectation warped her perception. She believed he would leave, the silent protector vanishing as mysteriously as he had arrived. Instead, Gale offered his hand, calloused and scarred from decades of operational engagements, yet gentle as the touch of a medic administering first aid. As he drew her upright, the world seemed to tilt, the streetlight hallowing them in stark relief. For the first time in months, her center of gravity shifted from fear to stability. Jordan's pulse slowed slightly, though her eyes darted reflexively toward the SUV. She did not yet see the latent consequences lingering there, the seeds of retribution still planted in the mind of Leighton, who had retreated but not relinquished intent. The street exhaled with the departing tires, leaving only the aftermath of confrontation, the cold bite of night air, and the unspoken assurance of protection, calibrated in every micro-expression of Gale's disciplined form. Gale's presence did not just shield, it communicated a silent operational directive. Boundaries are enforced, threats are neutralized, and duty is absolute. Jordan's trembling hand finally relaxed over the coin, but her gaze remained vigilant, aware that the fight had ended for now, yet the battlefield extended beyond the immediate perimeter. Gale did not drive Jordan to a precinct, nor to a crowded municipal shelter where she would have been catalogued as a statistic and left to navigate the bureaucracy of trauma. The Haven lay off a narrow, dimly lit side street, its facade unassuming brick, ivy, and the faint hum of security cameras. The vehicle idled at the curb, the engine's low vibration conveyed authority, restraint, and readiness. Gale opened his door first, then gestured for her. Jordan's fingers flexed around her coat hem, the coin pressing against her palm like a fragment of legacy, a fractured life. She moved hesitantly, legs stiff from hours of adrenaline and cold, yet each step toward the Haven's threshold was a small reclamation of agency. Inside, Elena waited. She was the professional embodiment of controlled force and compassion, a veteran herself. Her eyes, kind yet calculating, swept over Jordan in seconds, a rapid triage of posture, skin pallor, microhematomas, and gait. Every inch of the girl's body told a story of deprivation. "She needs a medical eval and a hot shower," Gale said, his voice clipped, professional, carrying the cadences of command. "Code for injuries, mostly superficial, but malnutrition is evident." Jordan flinched at the terminology, though she did not know why. Every word felt precise, clinical, confirming the reality she had tried to deny. Elena did not hesitate. Her hands moved with the quiet efficiency of someone trained in field medicine and human rehabilitation. She guided Jordan to a shower stall, the steam immediately softening the jagged edges of the street's cruelty. Water sluiced over grime and dry blood, peeling away months of neglect. Jordan's skin, pink and raw beneath layers of filth, shivered from more than temperature. The sensation was a confrontation with normalcy, one she had not allowed herself in years. She glimpsed herself in the fogged mirror and did not recoil. The face staring back was gaunt, etched with survival, but it carried a stubborn set of determination that even she had forgotten. Later, in the small communal kitchen, the scent of cooked protein and grains filled the air, grounding. Jordan sat, hands trembling slightly as she absently rubbed the brass coin with her thumb, tracing its worn edges. Each turn of the metal carried tactile reassurance. Gale's eyes, sharp and unrelenting even in casual observation, noted the micro-movements, thumb pressure, flicker in her gaze, the slight curling of her shoulders as though bracing for reprimand. "That coin," Gale said, nodding toward her hand. "May I?" Jordan hesitated, thumb hovering over the coin's surface, then slid it across the table. Gale's fingers closed around it like a tactician handling a classified item. He flipped it, inspected it with a professional's precision. A subtle twitch in his brow, a tightening around his jaw, signaled recognition and a spike of controlled shock. The coin was no ordinary keepsake. It bore the insignia of a precursor SEAL unit from Vietnam, a challenge coin with operational pedigree. "Where did you get this?" Gale asked, voice low, carrying both inquiry and weight of understanding. "My grandfather," Jordan whispered, barely above a breath, eyes avoiding direct contact. "He said it proved he existed when the world wanted to forget him." Her voice cracked, a fragile thread binding memory and reverence. Gale returned the coin gently, reverently, as though handling a piece of living history. "Hold on to that. That coin carries weight you don't understand yet." He watched her reaction closely, noting the subtle inhale, the minuscule nod, the way her knuckles whitened as they closed over the coin once more. He understood the psychological tether she had to its anchor, proof, heirloom of honor in a life otherwise adrift. That night, Jordan lay in a real bed, linen crisp against chilled skin. Her body sank into the mattress, a sensation she had not permitted herself in years. The residual adrenaline of the street slowly ebbed as the brain's threat assessment routines recalibrated. She let her eyes close, muscles unclenching incrementally, the coin resting against her chest. The room was quiet, save for the faint mechanical hum of security systems and distant street noise. Just as her mind drifted toward sleep, her cracked prepaid phone buzzed. The screen lit her face in the dark. "I saw you get in the truck. Nobody embarrasses me. Watch your back." Her thumb hovered over the screen, tension threading along her arm, fingers curling around the coin. The text was brief, direct and unspoken operational threat. Yet beneath the fear, a sliver of resolve hardened. She had been found, protected, yet the battlefield extended beyond the threshold of safety. She exhaled slowly, calculating, preparing. The night pressed against the walls of the haven, silent but full of promise and peril. 1 week later, Jordan's reflection was unrecognizable even to herself. The grime and exhaustion that had become permanent fixtures on her face were gone. Her hair was pulled back in a tight, professional knot, revealing the subtle curve of her jaw and the faint shadow of fatigue beneath her cheekbones. The uniform Elena had provided fit well crisp, clean, with insignia carefully aligned. Her eyes, once dull with street survival, now scanned the environment with precision, assessing lines of sight, crowd density, and the subtle currents of human behavior. Every movement was economical, practiced, a silent choreography of awareness. For the first time in years, she felt her body and mind coordinated, her posture upright, every step calibrated to avoid tension but maintain readiness. The kitchen door opened with a measured push, and Gale entered, dress blues impeccable, every crease a testament to discipline. He stopped at the threshold, scanning the space, eyes catching hers. "Check your 6, he said, the corners of his mouth lifting in a rare, controlled smile. "You look sharp, keep your head on a swivel. High brass tonight." The phrase was loaded, tactical, situational awareness, threat assessment, operational discretion, all couched in the language of mentorship and command. Jordan straightened her spine and met his gaze. "I won't let you down," she said, her voice steady, but a faint pulse in her throat betrayed lingering adrenaline. The words were an oath, a contract silently exchanged in a glance and a nod. Gale's eyes softened, though only slightly, before he pivoted back toward his duties, leaving her to integrate herself into the formal operation of the officers' gala. The ballroom was a cathedral of military tradition and social hierarchy. Chandeliers dripped crystal light over polished marble floors. The scent of champagne, polished wood, and faint perfume layered in the air. Officers moved with precise social choreography, conversing in clipped tones, gestures refined, the weight of rank ever present. Jordan navigated through the crowd, tray in hand, offering hors d'oeuvres with the mechanical efficiency of someone trained to move silently through a contested environment. She was present but unseen, a ghost among the high-ranking, her peripheral vision scanning micro-expressions, wrist orientation, and posture shifts. Each subtle cue registered, a mental map of potential threats forming in real time. The atmosphere shifted before she even perceived the source. The room seemed to exhale, silence pooled at the edges of conversation. Jordan's peripheral vision detected the change. The doorway framed a figure whose presence recalibrated the social equation. Admiral Sterling entered. Every movement, from his gait to the tilt of his head, radiated authority honed over decades of command. The posture, the clipped cadence of his steps, the weight of his metals all signaled experience and operational dominance. Beside him, a figure she recognized immediately, Leighton. The casual ease of his stride betrayed nothing, yet the subtle curl of his lip indicated the cruel intention she knew well. Gale froze mid-step. Jordan noticed the micro-tension in his shoulders, the brief pause in his breath, as he registered the identity of the threat. Leighton was no ordinary adolescent antagonist. He carried privilege as armor, arrogance as shield. The recognition passed silently between Gale and her. The bully was not merely a tormentor, but the Admiral's son, heir to power and influence. Leighton's gaze swept across the crowd with calculated precision, scanning until it landed on Jordan. A slow, deliberate grin unfurled, the kind practiced for maximum humiliation. His eyes, narrowed with predatory anticipation, tracked her movements. He leaned toward his father, voice hushed, delivering words that were met with a subtle nod, casual but laden with unspoken complicity. Without hesitation, Leighton detached from Sterling's side, moving toward the kitchen entrance with the measured grace of someone accustomed to privilege and impunity. He unfastened his gold watch, fingers brushing over the polished surface, then slipped it from his wrist with the smooth motion of a professional thief, clean, deliberate, assured. His attention remained fixed on Jordan, every movement calibrated to provoke, to manipulate, to humiliate in a public arena. Jordan's pulse quickened imperceptibly, her knuckles tightening on the tray. She inhaled slowly, chest rising and falling with controlled rhythm, eyes scanning exit points, staff movement, and the minute shifts of body language around her. Every micro-expression, every subtle shift of muscle or gaze was logged internally, a rapid operational assessment. She did not flinch, she did not retreat. The tray of hors d'oeuvres served as both shield and tool, a buffer against proximity and exposure. Gale's presence was a fixed point in the periphery, subtle yet immovable. His eyes tracked Leighton's approach, jaw tight, hands relaxed but prepared. The tableau in the ballroom crystallized, predator and prey, authority and entitlement, legacy and survival all posed on the precipice of confrontation. Gale's eyes tracked Leighton with the precision of a tactical operator surveying a battlefield. Every step, every micro-adjustment in posture, every subtle flick of his wrist or shift of weight was catalogued, analyzed, and neatly logged. DeBoe's trajectory was predictable, rehearsed, as if he were conducting a live-fire exercise in social manipulation. Gale's peripheral vision registered the ambient environment, service doors, surveillance cameras, emergency exits, and the spatial awareness of uniformed personnel, all variables that could influence the outcome. Leighton veered toward the service corridor, his gait casual, calculated, shoulders relaxed to suggest entitlement and immunity. The adolescent armor of arrogance carried him forward, a predator in designer footwear. Gale moved to intercept, but was momentarily blocked. A two-star general intersected his path, nodding curtly to Leighton with the familiarity of hierarchical courtesy. The obstruction forced Gale to recalibrate, adjusting his vector while keeping Leighton within his operational envelope. In the corridor, Leighton's confidence expanded to fill the space. He pivoted with a smirk, the corners of his mouth curling with practiced cruelty. Well, he said, slow but carrying a predatory cadence, "the trash cleaned up nice, but you still smell like the street." His tone was deliberate, designed to provoke humiliation, to compress Jordan's psychological field of operation. Jordan stiffened, back pressed against the wall, but she maintained her chin high. Her voice was controlled but quavered slightly, a subtle betrayal of the adrenaline still pulsing through her system. "Please move," she said, eyes scanning for egress, for assistance, for a way to recalibrate the encounter. "I'm working." Leighton's grin widened imperceptibly, the corners of his eyes twitching in anticipation, a micro-expression of self-satisfaction only discernible to someone trained to read threats and deceit. "Not for long," he murmured, tone low, voice a subtle instrument of intimidation. His hand moved with fluid precision, dropping the gold watch into her apron pocket. The metal clinked softly against the fabric, an auditory signal of false accusation. The corridor seemed to absorb the moment, the ambient hum of refrigeration units and fluorescent lighting fading into silence as Leighton's act rippled outward. He pivoted, voice rising to a bellow, "Security! Help! That woman stole my father's retirement watch." The command carried volume, authority, and the expectation of immediate compliance. Jordan froze for a heartbeat, then exhaled sharply through her nose, jaw tightening, and voice cracking as she protested. "He put it in my pocket." The words were precise, declarative, yet threaded with fear. Her eyes scanned rapidly for witnesses, for validation, for any confirmation that procedural reality might align with truth. The sound of boots on polished linoleum echoed as security MPs arrived, trained in rapid response and procedural containment. The Admiral's face darkened, subtle micro-tics of his jawline tightening, nostrils flaring, fingers pressing against the tabletop in controlled frustration. The weight of his authority pressed into the corridor, unspoken yet unmistakable. An MP's hand reached into Jordan's apron with methodical precision, guided by protocol and rapid situational assessment. The watch emerged, held aloft, its polished surface catching the corridor lighting. Leighton's smirk was a study in controlled triumph, pupils dilated slightly, lips curling, micromuscles in his jaw flexing in satisfaction at the perceived manipulation of authority. Jordan's gaze darted reflexively toward the kitchen, seeking Gale. Her pupils tracked the hallway with rapid micro-movements, scanning exit points, potential threats, and vectors of control. But he was gone, absent from the frame, his presence removed yet operationally aware through the orchestration of previous containment strategies. Jordan's hand tightened on her apron, knuckles whitening as her body readied itself for the next variable in this unfolding tactical scenario. The corridor seemed to constrict around her, walls narrowing in perception, yet the brass cone in her pocket rested against her palm, a tactile reminder of legacy, of survival, of proof that she was not unarmed in spirit. Every micro-expression, every imperceptible flicker of movement in Leighton, every twitch of muscle in the MPS was catalogued internally. She exhaled once, long and measured, the mental algorithms of threat assessment already initiating contingency plans. The tableau was set: adolescent entitlement versus trained civilian operative, truth versus perception, procedural authority versus personal vendetta. The next moment would define action, yet Jordan's body and mind had learned to read, anticipate, and adapt. Humiliation pressed down on Jordan with the weight of a steel beam. The sound of cuffs clicking around her wrists was sharp, precise, final. 200 pairs of eyes, attired in nettles, tailored suits, and high-collared uniforms, tracked her every movement, their collective gaze both interrogative and judgmental. Each flash of a camera or subtle tilt of a head registered internally a data set of observation and social evaluation. The cold steel bit into her skin, leaving faint impressions across her pulse points. Her breathing became deliberate, controlled, a measured cadence to counter the surge of adrenaline, the spike of cortisol that screamed fight or flee. "Take her to the brig," Admiral Sterling commanded. His voice carried across the grand hull, cold and metallic, a professional weapon forged through decades of command. His jawline was taut, his eyes, usually calm pools of command presence, were narrowed, unflinching. Every micro-twitch in his expression, the subtle flare of his nostrils, the slight furrow of the brow, the tightening around the ocular muscles signaled procedural finality, and operational certainty. "Wait," the single word cut through the murmured shuffle of officers and civilians. Gale stepped forward, the epitome of calm, his posture unyielding yet non-aggressive. Every inch of his movement was deliberate, fluid, a manifestation of tactical control. His gaze swept across the Admiral, then down the hull, noting positions of MPS, exit vectors, and potential points of interference. Not a single micromovement betrayed hesitation. The voice that followed was a low rumble of authority, measured, precise. "Commander," the Admiral barked, sharp as a ceremonial rifle's report, "stand down." The command was automatic, drilled into him through protocol, hierarchy, and the expectation of obedience. "With respect, sir," Gale replied, his tone calibrated to convey deference yet assert operational insight, "we may have a failure of intelligence." His eyes flicked to Jordan, then back to the Admiral, noting the subtle incline of Sterling's head, the minuscule tightening of jaw muscles, the contraction of his larynx preparing to speak. Every micro-expression became a data point in Gale's internal operational matrix. Gale's hand brushed against his chest, fingertips pressing lightly, but deliberately. The tactile signal, imperceptible to all but the intended recipient, conveyed direction, instruction, and intent. Jordan's eyes tracked the subtle motion, her pupils dilating fractionally, recognition passing instantly. The coin's inner pocket, the covert compartment she had used to hide it, was the next step, the leverage point. Her fingers moved with the quiet precision of a trained operator retrieving a classified document. She extracted the brass coin, feeling the familiar weight, its edges cool and reassuring against her skin. "Admiral," Gale continued, voice steady, carrying operational clarity over emotion, "before condemning her, ask your son why his fingerprints will be in her apron pocket, but hers won't be on that watch." Each word struck like a precision-guided directive, aimed at the logical inconsistencies that any trained investigator or officer would recognize immediately. Leighton's face flushed, pupils narrowing, the subtle tick in his left eye betraying the cognitive dissonance he could not suppress. "That's ridiculous," he blurted, the sound cracking slightly under the tension of being caught. His smirk faltered, lips curling downward in imperceptible fractions as the first hints of exposure began to register. Gale ignored him, gaze fixed on the Admiral. The room seemed to shrink around the command circle, the ambient noise fading into irrelevance. His presence, calm yet authoritative, dominated the corridor of attention, every movement economical, every breath deliberate. "Jordan has something that outranks your son's accusation," he said. The phrasing was deliberate, legal, operational, unambiguous. It placed the burden of proof where it belonged, yet allowed procedure to unfold without spectacle. Gale inclined his head toward her, a micro-nod, imperceptible to anyone else but commanding in significance. Jordan met it with a barely perceptible shift of her shoulders, a subtle tightening of her jaw, and a deep, controlled inhale. She understood. She lifted the coin between thumb and forefinger, the metal catching the chandelier light, reflecting fractured rays across the polished floor. The silence that followed was heavier than any bellowed accusation. Every eye in the room registered the moment, yet only a few understood the depth of authority, the weight of history, and the operational leverage contained in her hand. Gale's eyes met hers once more, a silent signal, a tactical affirmation. She lifted the coin higher, fingers steady despite the pulse racing along her wrist, knowing that the next movement would pivot the entire event. The silent signal had been received, the corridor was hushed, a vacuum in the middle of controlled chaos. The MPS hesitated, the clinking of cuffs muted against the polished marble floor as the Admiral gestured with deliberate precision for one of Jordan's hands to be released. The movement was mechanical, yet in that small interval, the weight of authority shifted subtly, the flow of power recalibrated. Jordan's fingers flexed instinctively, knuckles whitening, a micro-adjustment as she prepared to extract what she had safeguarded for years. She reached into the inner pocket of her uniform with practiced care, the movement precise, methodical, almost surgical. The coin's cool surface pressed into her palm, familiar contours grounding her. Each tactile ridge, the slight imperfection along the edge, conveyed history, proof, legacy. She held it between thumb and forefinger, careful not to jostle it against her palm. This was more than metal, it was testimony. "This was my grandfather's," she said, voice steady, controlled, the cadence of someone trained to deliver critical intelligence under duress. "He told me to never lie, cheat, or steal." The words hung in the air, deliberate, carrying moral weight beyond mere sentiment. Her eyes scanned the room subtly, registering micro-reactions, the slight flare of nostrils on the MPS, the barely perceptible narrowing of eyelids on officers nearby, the twitch in Layton's left jaw as he realized the evidence he had attempted to manufacture might now betray him. Admiral Sterling leaned forward, eyes narrowing slightly as he received the coin. His fingers brushed over the metal with a tactile precision that suggested both recognition and incredulity. The jagged defect along the coin's edge caught the ambient light, reflecting a fractured glint across his irises. His face went pale, almost imperceptibly at first, a subtle blanching around the temples, the faint drop in blood flow revealing a physiological response to shock, memory, and recognition. "This is a unit for Ghost Coin," he whispered, voice a low tremor barely audible over the hushed murmurs of the surrounding officers. Only 12 were ever made. His pupils dilated fractionally, a micro-expression of cognitive processing at maximum speed. He rotated the coin between thumb and forefinger, tactile verification confirming his internal knowledge. His gaze shifted to Jordan, voice still trembling, a rare deviation from his usual composure. "Your grandfather was Sergeant Elias Miller." The question was deliberate, surgical, an intelligence query phrased to confirm data, all observing physiological and micro-expressive responses. "Yes, sir," Jordan replied, subtle tension in her jawline, the faint pulse along her temple visible only under acute observation. Her lips were set, the corners barely twitching as she suppressed residual fear, each breath calculated to maintain control. The Admiral swallowed hard, a slow, measured motion, micromuscles in his throat contracting visibly. The weight of history pressed down on him. "He saved my life in Da Nang." The admission was deliberate, a factual acknowledgement of operational reality, yet threaded with personal gravity, a rare convergence of duty, memory, and respect. He turned his gaze to his son. The transition in his expression was almost imperceptible at first, the crimson flush of parental frustration ebbed, replaced by the colder, more exacting mask of military judgment. His lips pressed into a thin line, jaw muscles flexed minimally, eyes narrowing not in anger, but in controlled evaluation. The shift from rage to calculated disappointment was deliberate, authoritative, and operational recalibration of consequences and corrective action. Every micro-expression, every subtle line in his face communicated the dissolution of Layton's protective aura of entitlement and the imposition of structured accountability. Layton's grin faltered. His pupils constricted, lips tightening into a near line, the subtle tick in his left eye betraying the internal conflict, the cognitive dissonance between perceived invulnerability and the tactical reality now confronting him. The brass coin, inert in weight but monumental in authority, had altered the operational theater entirely. Jordan's fingers curled around the coin again, reassurance transmitted through tactile feedback. The metal was heavy, yet grounding. The room's atmosphere shifted, not in volume, but in frequency. Officers' micro-reactions, MPS postures, and Layton's faltering composure combined into a kinetic tableau of authority restored. In that moment, legacy, proof, and truth were weaponized silently, a signal stronger than words, louder than accusations. Layton's confidence collapsed in microseconds. The flush of panic crept across his face, faintly visible around the temples and along the cheekbones, a physiological signal betraying the cognitive collapse occurring internally. His lips parted, tremor in the lower jaw, as the word stumbled out, high-pitched, urgent. "Dad, it's just a coin. She probably stole that too." Each syllable carried the desperate cadence of a man realizing the operational environment had shifted beyond his control. His eyes darted, pupils constricting, scanning the room for allies, for witnesses, for any vector of escape. Sterling's reaction was immediate, a kinetic shockwave through the chain of command. He did not raise his voice to theatrics. Instead, he deployed authority with surgical precision. "Enough." The single word carried the finality of protocol, an unassailable command honed through decades of operational leadership. The MPS at his side released Jordan's hand from the temporary custody that had bound her, their grips disengaging with mechanical efficiency, leaving her fingers momentarily free to flex and absorb residual stress. Gale's eyes, precise and assessing, shifted to the large monitor behind the bar. With a subtle hand gesture economical, he initiated the playback. The screen flickered to life, and the corridor footage, recorded in high definition, displayed every calibrated motion of Layton's duplicity. His fingers, the glint of the gold watch, the slow arc of placing it into Jordan's apron, and the sudden bellow for security were all captured in unassailable evidence. The movement of the camera and Layton's reflections in polished surfaces amplified the proof with an objective clarity that no verbal protest could counter. The gallery of observers reacted collectively, micro-expressions cascading in waves, eyebrows raising fractionally, lips pressing into thin lines, heads tilting with involuntary assessment. Officers' hands twitched slightly at holsters and cuffs, MPS shifted weight minutely as they updated situational awareness, and the hum of disbelief vibrated through the crowd. The disgust was visceral, silent but palpable, as eyes registered betrayal, manipulation, and moral failure. Layton's pupils contracted further, the whites of his eyes becoming more prominent, jaw muscles locking in a near-unconscious tick. A thin bead of sweat appeared along his temple, his previous arrogance replaced by rapid calculations of consequences, exposure, and flight. He bolted for the nearest exit, momentum aggressive but uncontrolled, limbs coordinating in panic, shoes squeaking against the polished floor. "Secure him," Sterling commanded, voice a controlled instrument of operational authority. The phrasing was devoid of emotion but packed with consequence, each syllable metronomic, leaving no room for misinterpretation. Two Marines intercepted Layton with fluid precision, closing on vectors to block escape routes. Their grips were firm yet professional, controlling without excessive force, calibrated to subdue but not to injure unnecessarily. Layton's arms flailed briefly, hands clenching at empty air, the tension in his fingers visible in the subtle whitening of knuckles and the twitch of his forearm muscles. "Do you know who I am?" he screamed, voice straining, tremor betraying the internal panic. His gaze flitted between the Marines and his father, searching for the protective buffer of familial immunity, for the signal that his previous entitlement still had operational leverage. "Yes," Sterling replied, tone flat, controlled, every word clipped and precise. His eyes were cold, scanning Layton's posture and micro-expressions with professional detachment. A civilian who just committed a federal offense, and right now, no son of mine. The finality of the declaration hung in the air, a complete operational and moral disarmament. The room absorbed it, each observer registering the collapse of power, the realignment of authority, and the restoration of justice. Layton's shoulders sagged minutely under the weight of exposure, the micro-twitches, panic still present in his lower eyelids. The brass coin in Jordan's pocket rested against her palm, a tactile confirmation of legacy, validation, and operational truth. Every micro-expression, from Gale's calm scrutiny to the MPS disciplined control, communicated the finality of the moment. The room remained still, not from inaction, but from a collective acknowledgement that the trap had snapped shut. The orchestration of authority, evidence, and legacy had realigned the theater, the adolescent bully neutralized, the truth amplified, and the professional and moral chain of command reinforced. Jordan's voice cut through the charged silence like a scalpel, soft but imbued with precision and authority. "I don't want him in prison, that just makes rich boys angrier. He needs to learn discipline, consequences." Each word was deliberate, measured, carrying the weight of observation and moral calculus honed from survival. Her eyes flicked briefly to Layton, noting the twitch of his left eyelid, the subtle tightening of his jaw, the shallow inhale that betrayed the rising anxiety within him. Her own hand brushed over the brass coin in her pocket, a tactile anchor that grounded her in the moment, transmitting the unspoken message that legacy and truth were hers to wield. Admiral Sterling inhaled, a slow, calculated breath that expanded the chest cavity, engaging diaphragmatic control, a signal of measured internal conflict. His fingers pressed against the polished surface of the nearby podium, knuckles whitening fractionally. The weight of paternal duty and military protocol intersected with operational ethics in his mind, and the micro-expression along his forehead and almost imperceptible ridge forming between the brows betrayed the delicate tension of decision-making. "Then he will learn the way we did," Sterling said, his voice low, firm, and imbued with the authority of decades enforcing discipline. He did not raise it unnecessarily. Volume was never required when presence and command sufficed. His gaze swept the room, assessing MPS, officers, and witnesses alike, ensuring the operational theater aligned with the execution of justice. Every head tilted fractionally, every micro-adjustment in stance registered, the room recalibrated around his decision. He pivoted subtly to the MPS, standing at precise intervals, their postures rigid, hands near holsters, but restrained, reflecting professional readiness and anticipation of potential compliance or resistance. "My son will report tomorrow morning for voluntary enlistment in the United States Navy as a seaman recruit," he announced, enunciating each syllable with the precision of a seasoned officer issuing orders under rules of engagement. "He will enter through the delayed entry program and then ship out to Great Lakes Recruit Training Command." Leighton's knees betrayed him first. A subtle wobble, just enough to shift his weight uncomfortably, his center of gravity betraying the internal processing of consequences he had not anticipated. His fingers twitched at his sides, fists clenching and unclenching, the micro-tremor visible along the forearms. Pupils constricted, scanning for any perceived loophole, any avenue to circumvent accountability. None appeared, no officer track. "No privileges," Sterling continued, eyes narrowing imperceptibly, jaw muscles engaging in the micro-expression of controlled authority. The cadence of his words struck at the core of entitlement Leighton had relied on for perceived invulnerability. "He will learn honor as a number, not a name." Each phrase deployed with surgical precision, designed to dismantle assumptions, enforce equity, and instill foundational discipline. Gale, standing slightly behind, observed Jordan with a faint, almost imperceptible nod, a subtle signal of acknowledgement, trust, and quiet affirmation. Jordan returned it, lips pressing together, the corners of her mouth twitching in recognition of shared understanding. Their eyes met briefly, exchanging the unspoken calculus that the mission, long in preparation, had reached a pivotal operational success. Leighton's shoulders slumped fractionally, the microtension in his back muscles slowly releasing as the enormity of the decision settled. He exhaled, barely audible, a measured release of oxygen and stress, the internal fight-or-flight response subdued by the inevitability of structured discipline. The brass coin in Jordan's pocket was an invisible counterweight, a symbol of accountability, legacy, and operational truth. The room remained still, not from fear but from an understanding that the hierarchical and ethical calculus had been resolved. Authority had been reasserted, moral imperatives enforced, and the personal intervention of legacy and judgment had achieved the intended corrective measure. Jordan's posture straightened imperceptibly, fingers brushing the coin, once more a tactile acknowledgement that justice, structured and fair, had been administered. Leighton, for the first time, had no avenue for evasion. His prior autonomy, rooted in privilege and assumption, had been neutralized. Operational reality replaced entitlement, accountability replaced arrogance. In that stillness, the orchestration of moral, legal, and procedural authority had crystallized, a tableau of justice delivered quietly, efficiently, and irrevocably. 3 months had passed since the night that had shifted the balance of power, discipline, and justice. The streets that had once been Jordan's battleground were now distant memories, replaced by the structured rhythm and security of the haven. She entered the facility with purposeful steps, her polished blazer crisp, hair neatly pulled back, eyes alert and scanning. The clipboard in her hand carried more than schedules and notes, it carried responsibility, authority, and the tangible weight of transformation. The brass coin in her pocket pressed lightly against her palm, a tactile reminder of the legacy she now upheld. Elena, her partner and mentor, stood nearby, her posture relaxed but observant, an unspoken acknowledgement that Jordan had earned her place beside her as co-director. Gale waited at the door, tall and imposing even in casual dress, the subtle creases along his fatigue sleeves hinting at a life lived in high-stakes environments. His dark eyes tracked Jordan as she approached, calculating, always assessing, the faint twitch in his right eyelid betraying a hint of dry amusement. "Director Miller," he said, voice low but carrying the weight of familiarity and respect. Jordan's lips twitched into a smile, brief but genuine. "Stop it," she replied, the corners of her mouth tightening with the kind of restrained humor that only comes from knowing someone has been there through battles, both literal and personal. Gale extended an envelope, the edges crisp, bearing the insignia of Great Lakes Recruit Training Command. "I got a letter," he said, tone neutral, but the weight behind it was unmistakable. Jordan took it with deliberate care, fingers brushing the seal, eyes narrowing slightly in anticipation. She opened it slowly, scanning the words, absorbing each line with a combination of professional detachment and emotional resonance. "Ms. Miller, it's cold here. My feet hurt. The yell from sunrise to lights out. No one cares who my dad is, I'm just Recruit Sterling. I think I understand now. I'm sorry, Senior Sterling." The handwriting, the formal address, and the admission of accountability struck Jordan in ways that were almost imperceptible. A micro-tremor in her chest, a shallow inhale, a subtle clench of her jaw as the words sank in. She folded the letter methodically, smoothing the crease with careful fingers, and let her hand brush the brass coin in her pocket. The tactile sensation grounded her, a tangible link between past struggle and present authority. Her eyes flicked briefly to Gale, catching the faint rise of an eyebrow, the slight narrowing of his eyes, a micro-expression signaling approval, acknowledgement, and sheer understanding of the mission accomplished. "Ready for the briefing?" he asked, voice steady, professional, carrying the cadence of someone accustomed to operations where clarity and focus are critical. "Ready," she replied, her voice carrying the subtle resonance of confidence and quiet determination. She stepped forward with measured purpose, the floor beneath her echoing faintly, each footfall a testament to regained agency and newly assumed authority. The haven, once a sanctuary she had only needed for survival, now became the operational command center for her new mission, helping others who had been stripped of hope, who had nothing left but resilience waiting to be restored. Gale watched her go, eyes scanning her movements with the practiced assessment of a SEAL operator observing an operation in progress. His fingers brushed against the watch on his wrist, checking the time, though not out of impatience, rather as a professional habit, marking the closing of one mission and the readiness to monitor the next. Jordan's stride, her posture, the subtle rhythm of her breathing all indicated someone who had evolved from vulnerability to controlled authority. The brass coin rested quietly against her, emblematic of the bridge between past sacrifice and present responsibility. Mission accomplished. Yet even as the phrase registered in his mind, the subtleties of operational readiness remained, the awareness that challenges would arise, that threats were never fully neutralized, and that the work of restoring hope, dignity, and justice was continuous. For Jordan, this was not an end but the commencement of a new operational cycle, one measured in impact rather than conflict, in mentorship rather than survival. The letter, the coin, the glance exchanged with Gale, each detail layered with significance, echoing the quiet victories of discipline, courage, and moral authority. She was no longer the woman who had trembled in the street. She was a leader, a guardian, and a testament to the principle that true power is measured by the capacity to protect, guide, and restore. Her eyes scanned the room, calculating, assessing, ready to act. Each micro-expression, each controlled breath, every subtle tick reflected readiness, commitment, and the resolve to fulfill a mission that transcended herself. As she moved toward the first briefing with Elena, a sense of quiet inevitability settled in the room. The legacy of courage, the chain of accountability, and the enforcement of honor had converged in a single operational continuum. Subscribe to our channel now and hit the notification bell to follow every twist, turn, and incredible moment. Join us and be part of the journey. Your next adventure starts here.